Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the 41st level of the RPG Cave. I'm one of your hosts, the level 99 human archmage, Ryan Turford, and I'm joined, as always, by the level 99 elf medic, Mr. Garret Bland. Garret, how are you doing this lovely Monday evening, good sir?
I'm doing good. As an elf, what am I, a medic?
You're a medic.
Crafting all the potions and crafting the elixirs and stuff, you know?
You're doing this all on your apothecary table, right? Is that what's going on over there?
I'm raising my apothecary level right now in my medical level. So good. I can heal you, Ryan.
I mean, Garret, you're a doctor. That's why I made you a medic.
You know what? I think I'm a real life, like, you know, not like medical doctor or whatever, but I'm a chemist. So I got all the potions.
You're like crafting in real life. I mean, again, I just work on TV. I just spin around in my chair all day. There's no crafting going on there.
I understand data that does chemical stuff. So I think, I approve that. Yeah. I'm an excellent understanding of the crafting going on with potions.
As y'all can probably tell at home, and especially if you've looked at the title of this episode, we're talking about crafting systems on this episode of the RPG Cave. But before we get into all that, we got to clear the dungeon of the trash mobs. So folks at home, if you want to support the show, there's a number of awesome ways to do that. If you like what we do, of course, you can subscribe on your podcast feed of choice. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Amazon Music, apparently, pretty much all the places you find podcasts. So check us out there. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Also, maybe leave us a nice rating if you're nice over on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Maybe even leave us an Apple Podcast review. All that stuff helps the show grow. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe, share, comment about what your favorite games with our crafting systems are, as well. Ding, ding, ding. Ring that bell for some notifications as whenever we post new videos, you'll get notifications about those. And last but not least, throw a little tip in the tip jar and outcomes content over on Patreon, patreon.com/YumiCapri. If you want early access to this and all of our shows. Also, Garret, yes. April 15th, it's happening. Yumi Capri Day is coming back.
Let's go.
I'm very excited about this. Obviously, by the time y'all are actually listening to this episode, you've seen us, promoting this on Twitter. We're basically going to have like an 8-hour live stream of us, doing live podcasts. We're going to be, playing games with the community. And then we have some amazing announcements that we want to share with all y'all. It's going to be a really special day. I mean, we did this last year. It was an amazing day as well. And we're doing it again this year, Yumi Capri Day. In fact, that is where we announced this show, Garret. It was 1 year to the date from April 15th is when we announced that we were doing this show. So what dark secrets are lurking behind Yumi Capri Day this year? You have to tune in and find out. So April 15th, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over on YouTube, youtube.com/Yumi Capri. Again, we'll be live streaming there all day. So come hang out with us. We might even do a live version of one of our podcasts, maybe even this one. Wink, wink.
Maybe.
But anyways, enough about all that. That's so far away, Garret. But right now, it's time to read from the sacred text because today's topic, as I mentioned, all about RPG crafting systems. We figured we'd do something a little bit different this week where we're going to be talking about a specific mechanic in game and, what makes this mechanic work and what doesn't work. And what are some of the things we like and don't like about this particular mechanic. So we decided to do crafting systems. I actually think that crafting systems, when we're talking about mechanics in any RPG, Garret, is actually a great place to start because it's so ubiquitous with RPGs nowadays. And it's also really bled into non-RPGs in a lot of ways, like in a big way. Like, when a game like The Last of Us, for example, like a third-person shooter brings in a heavy element of crafting to it that, again, is very simplistic, but it's still a big part of that experience.
Yeah.
You can definitely tell, like, this is really broken into the mainstream and really done some crazy things. So before we get into things, I just want to know, just surface level thoughts, Garret.
Yes.
How do you feel about crafting systems in RPGs just in general? Like, what's your overall
in RPGs in general? Man, oh man, crafting can be a very malleable, very versatile mechanic. You say it's ubiquitous. I say it's modular. It can be into a game, into an RPG, as big as you want, as small as you want. And I think what makes a crafting system like really, stand out or unique is how well it kind of marries to the gameplay itself. And I think there's a lot of examples from both sides. One is crafting is kind of tagged along at the end there, kind of just there just to, say, hey, we have a crafting system in here. Here it is. There's that one side. And then there's the other side where almost everything can be centered around the crafting system itself. And I enjoy a good crafting system. I do enjoy tinkering around. I'm an engineer. I like to gather all the different parts and see what comes together and see what could be built or what could be made or what can be improved, what can be made differently. I really applaud developers taking the time and investing in a crafting system that rewards the player and invests the time. So that's my surface level thoughts, that crafting is super versatile. I would say you don't need a huge complex crafting system. You just need something maybe that's enjoyable and it just marries well to it complements the gameplay rather than, it's an additive or it's something extra, a garnish, you say, like at the end there. So
yeah, nice.
That's pretty much it.
For me, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to, hold back my thoughts on this, Garrett. I mean, from all of my experiences with crafting in RPGs over the years, every time I see a crafting system in an RPG, I get scared. I get scared because I know how the crafting systems can go wrong in many, many ways. So I get always a little bit worried when a game has a crafting system in it, but the crafting system is not like one of the more central focuses of the game. Because I always find that in most cases, the crafting system has to be like a major thought point of the developers when they're developing the game in order for it to be really well done. And to your point, Garrett, they can't just, slap it on there and then hope it's going to, work out well or hope that people are going to enjoy it or engage with it because, it's one of those things where if it's not done well, it almost is a feel bad for the game. It almost takes away from, it can actually take away from a really good RPG experience sometimes, if not properly executed. Which is why, again, like if developers are going to put crafting systems into their games, I really feel like it has to be really thought out and planned well, because again, like there's like a very fine balance that you kind of have to walk with crafting systems. And again, we'll talk about it more when we kind of get into examples and like what works and what doesn't. But I personally find that more often than not, I've found crafting systems for me in RPGs to be an afterthought and not something that I'm personally wanting to engage with, versus the times where they really stand out. But again, I think there's lots of examples both ways. And again, we're going to talk about them, but I always love to be surprised by good crafting systems in RPGs.
Me too.
And there's definitely lots of examples of that. So yeah, that's kind of my several thoughts where I'm more of a crafting system detractor. But again, I feel like they can be done really, really well. And I hope that, this conversation kind of brings out some of those ideas and so we can talk
I definitely, I understand your detracting like from the crafting system itself, because you're right. A crafting system could even harm your game, especially when, let's say, one player relies on it and it's just it feels like a slog. You can get into a pitfall with crafting of like needing to get certain items or needing to get certain materials, and that takes time. And you really need to make sure in whatever RPG that you're in with the developer is like you make sure that the crafting is kind of mixed in with the story and the gameplay, and actually you want the player to have fun. And I think that's very hard to do. Yeah. I'm not telling the developer what to do right now. I know that a developer is like really thinking about this when they want to implement a beneficial or a good crafting system in there. And I really do applaud the developers that actually do it very well. So
for sure.
Yeah.
So first off, I wanted to start with the conversation by just also talking about, what a crafting system is, or what we kind of define as a
Sure.
crafting system, because we could take this a bunch of different ways. And ultimately, I feel like just a crafting system in an RPG is the ability to take one or more objects that you find in the environment and turn them into a usable item, or something that's beneficial to the player, essentially by basically providing you the tools to do that. So, and I feel like it's more than just, taking two ores together to kind of, smith a sword together in a lot of RPGs, which I think is kind of the more commmmon way of doing that. Because I also think like cooking systems in RPGs, for example, would fall under this benefit idea, because it's the same concept where you're basically getting, multiple in-game items. Sure, they're food, but you combine them together and then you get, a dish out of it that then, buffs your party or does certain things in battle or allows you to heal your party, things like that. So I think that there's a lot of stuff like that works into it. Or alchemy. If alchemy is in a game, like, a certain little series that Garrett talked about once, I think that, games with alchemy in it, that's a crafting system right there.
That is the crafting system.
That's exactly. So whether you're leather working in a game like Skyrim, or you're cooking in like Breath of the Wild or something like that, like all that stuff, they're all crafting systems. So I think they all kind of fall under the same header. And I know, like, some people, when you say just the word crafting system, they think of, like, the traditional kind of blacksmithing or alchemy that comes to mind when we talk about, just the term crafting system. But I think it just applies to a big, broad brush of ideas. And again, I think that's going to kind of reflect in our conversation. Garrett, do you agree with my definition, or do you think we need to tweak the definition? What do you think?
I think that's a good definition. Basically, you're merging materials or some sort of, like, I don't know, like any items out there in, like, you acquire through any kind of gameplay, and then you have some blueprint or whatever to merge them together to make like an item. It could be a skill, maybe, perhaps, or like as potions or buffs or debuffs, cooking. I have a question for you, though.
Of course.
I think it can be argued that Shin Megami Tensei series fusing monsters together to get one monster, inheriting skills from both and merging into one, that is in some form or fashion crafting.
Yeah, I think it counts, especially like with the way you can farm monsters in both that and Persona, because you also do that in Persona as well.
Yeah.
I do think it technically counts underneath these guidelines, anyways, of what we would consider a crafting system, anyways.
Definitely a broad view of what we think crafting is. It's more like you're gathering materials or any kind of objects, and you are making a new thing or building something or
and
whatever.
In Shin Megami Tensei's case, you're collecting demons from the world, and you're smacking them together to make a new demon. Like, it's, and
you're registering it into the compendium, and then rinse and repeat, and then you get all the moves recycled in there too. Yeah, it's definitely So cool.
Yeah, it's the same as going down and learning a leather recipe in World of Warcraft, and then putting together a belt with all the fur that you skinned from all the animals you killed in that game. God, World of Warcraft's a game. But there you go. So that's kind of our definition. So I felt it was important to kind of define that, going into it, so you can understand kind of what some of the things we're talking about. So I want to know, Garrett, what makes a good crafting system? Like, what are the things that you actively look for in a crafting system that to make it, good in your eyes?
To make it a good crafting system, what I often look for is kind of, first off, what am I making and what's the end result? Do I need it? Do I need it right now, or do I need it later? I think with crafting, you don't need to get into it firsthand if you don't have to. So, like, a good crafting system needs to be set in where you may need it, but it would be a good bonus for you to have it. There's a lot of games out there that, they put in this crafting system, and you're making a weapon or armor or whatever. And it's like, no, you can just buy this. You can just find this out there in the wild.
Or sometimes find like something that's way better.
Yeah. And so those type of systems like, well, okay, I'm not going to bother with my time investing into that one material or whatever. So yeah, I think one is timing. The other is how accessible it is to get the materials. Where do I get it? Do I get it from a monster? How do I know I get it from a monster? How do I get I like a little bit of direction where I'm getting my materials. I don't think enough games really do that. And I think they just want to push the player to like explore or whatever. And that's fine. I would just like to have some sort of guidance of like, if I really need something, if I really need an item, like make sure I know where to go.
Like almost if there was like an in-game journal or something like that, that you could access at any time, that would tell you like, hey, you've collected this material before, here's where you get it from, kind of thing. Like that kind of idea. Like that's something I would love to see more, because I know some games have done that in particular, where they give you like an in-game way of looking up where you've gotten some of the resources before. And again, it doesn't have, I don't feel like it has to give you that information right away until you've at least collected one of that thing. Just to, have the mystery in the game, I guess. Because if you really wanted to know, you could just go to a guide outside the game and probably look it up. But I like the idea of the developers giving you like in-game tools that allow you to at least cross-reference that information of materials that you've gathered before, in case 20 hours later you need to collect 4 more of a certain item that you collected in the first like 2 hours of the game, and you're not sure exactly how to go get it. Like there should be an in-game way to look that up that information. I actually agree with your point on that, Garrett.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of my last points is like crafting. I like more not disparate items everywhere and it's all just shovelware type of stuff. Have a connection, have a flow to your crafting from level 1 to level 100, or from beginning to the end of the game. How am I getting there? How am I getting the new upgraded weapons? Is it just from materials over there, or am I connecting from like the lower level weapon up on up, and I'm evolving? Let's say I'm evolving a weapon or evolving a potion. I find that to be more like rewarding as a player that has that type of connection. I don't know about a disparate like kind of crafting system where I think that's fine. It's just a very surface level crafting system, and that's okay too. For me, I prefer a little bit deeper. It's like, okay, I'm going from one item and I'm evolving it to the next and making it feel unique. It's gonna go at the end point somewhere. But yeah, that's pretty much what I have in terms of a good crafting system is those kinds of points.
Okay. So for me, I feel similarly to a lot of your points that you mentioned, especially the in-game information guide. I think is really helpful, whether again, it's in a journal or some other way to get that information in game. I think is really helpful, because again, I don't want to always, go and reference a guide for a lot of this stuff. Like, I think that's kind of silly. So, and that definitely, I can tell that when I have to resort to a guide for crafting materials, that I'm not naturally finding on my own, I feel like that's just the fault of the game design right there, not, conveying enough information to the player as to where to get all this stuff, or it's not reminding you enough of like, hey, by the way, this thing that you actually need, well, it's actually back there. So there's that. But for me, I feel like what makes a good crafting system is kind of, and again, this is kind of a delicate balance, but stick with me, because, I'm trying to eat my cake and have it too, but this is how I feel about crafting systems. So first of all, I feel like a good crafting system has to feel important in some way. As you kind of talked about, Garrett, it really has to feel like it's part of the world or part of the lore, part of like there has to be a reason why you're doing this. Like it has to feel like an important part of the experience, and there's a reason for doing it. It feels like there has to be a reason for crafting. Whether it's a lore reason, like, hey, this world is a post-apocalyptic world, and you're like scrounging supplies together in order to survive, to a situation where there's a lore reason why, like, you can't, like, for example, blacksmiths don't exist anymore, so you need to forge your own weapons, like something like that. Like, I think that, like, there needs to be some kind of hook like that in the lore or the way or the game world itself to make it feel really natural. And again, some games I think do this really well. And again, I'm going to talk about those in my examples. And some games do that very poorly. And I'll talk about those in my examples as well. Other things that I look for are rewards to the player. And it doesn't have to be just weapons or armor upgrades or anything like that. I feel like rewards can be a bunch of different things. They can be cosmetics, I think, or the ability to unlock, different pets or mounts if it's an MMO. I think that's really important to a good crafting system. Or like the feeling that if you put all this time into and resources into, crafting all these items, Garrett, I hope that there's a reason for doing that. There's some kind of player satisfaction involved with that. Like when you do that, you're getting something out of it, essentially something that's tangible in the game. Because again, to your point about, sometimes like, why craft this item when I can go buy it? Yeah, I feel like a lot of games do that, where they don't ride the balance of, if you're going to put a crafting system in there to craft a weapon or armor piece, as an example, why then offer it as a buyable item in the same game? Like, you should make it, if you want to devote, the time for players to put into a crafting system for armor and weapons, then you should make some of the more powerful weapons in the game exclusive to that crafting mode, rather than being, purchasable outside of that. Sure, I understand the idea of doing that is to, give players who don't want to interact with that system that ability. But at the same time, you're basically you're basically handicapping your like crafting system right there, and making it so that you feel like there's less of a reason for
valuable or anything like that. You're just having it there. It's just an extra
having it there
thing
for having
now.
it there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like essentially, like, you get the joy, I guess, of crafting something that you could go buy yourself. When that's silly. I will always take the pay with gold option every single time when it comes to that, because I don't want to go with that. But also, while I do say that I want it to be mandatory, or not mandatory, but I want it to feel important and to reward the players, I also don't want it to ever be a mandatory part of the experience. Unless, of course, the crafting is a central part of the game experience. Like the Atelier games, for example, I feel like that's an exception to that rule, because you kind of know going into those games that you have to interact with the alchemy in order to progress the game. Because the game's fundamentally designed around that. So I don't mind it when games do that in particular, but in certain games where the crafting system is kind of like an afterthought until a certain part of the story, and then you're required to use the crafting system to continue, and then you never have to worry about the crafting system from there, I feel like that's just a feel bad right there. So that's why I don't really love it when crafting systems are mandatory, but I also love the idea of, even if it's not mandatory, knowing that, some of the best, things in the game are locked behind that if you want to engage with it. But at the same time, being able to, complete the game without it. So you can go both ways with it. That's kind of how I feel about it. So, and again, I just feel like not enough games kind of toe that line, which goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where I do get let down a lot by crafting systems for that reason. Cause I feel like they either fail on one side or the other, where either they make it too mandatory, but doesn't really but it doesn't reward you enough for it, or the other side of the coin, where it rewards you, but it's not really mandatory, and there's no real reason for you to do. Or sometimes too, and I don't know about you, Garrett, if you feel this way, but sometimes crafting systems can be kind of grindy as well, and
it can be.
That can be a serious problem as well in certain situations. But that's why I feel like. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think that's more for MMO RPGs. I can really feel it. Crafting in an MMO is like, all right, now let's craft 10 iron swords. All right, and so you can get your next level, so you can craft the mithril ore in the armor, and it's just like, okay, let's go through the grind. And those people that are really into that, It's like, all right, I'm gonna grind and do this and craft it. It's like they get a little bit more rewarded, and but you're gonna spend more time on different things that will reward you differently. So yeah, I can understand crafting. It's very malleable. It's very versatile. It could be as rewarding as you make it out to be, and it's really up to the developer to make sure to have that balance for crafting. Yeah,
exactly. So that's how I feel about what makes a good crafting system. So on the other side of the fence, Garrett, what makes a bad crafting system in your eyes, or what are the things that takes a good crafting system and makes it not as good in your eyes?
I think it's just a matter of like, if I can't get the materials or it becomes frustrating, I just drop it. I'm just like, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this. And it really sucks when, you're really trying to look for the material, or it's very hard to get it, or you look up a guide. It's like, all right, you're going to have to do this, and that like 50 million times. And it's like, yeah, but I want that weapon right now. But it's just a slog to get it. I think, that's where we go back to previously. It's that balance. It's like, you don't want to make sure it feels like a chore, right? You want to make sure you're investing some time in order to get the materials, but you don't want to make it a chore. So I would say like, make it accessible as you can. I think also like there's a lot of times with crafting, it's just basic items. And if it's all just similar items as you get in the game, that's a poor crafting system. It's like, all right, I'm going to drop it and not mess with it at all. And I think, I wouldn't say this a poor crafting system, but if it's just a matter of, I don't know. I don't even know if you call this crafting too. It's like you put a gem or a rune on your weapon and look, it's buffed. It's debuffed. It's powered up. I don't know if that's crafting at that point. It's just
but
adding.
What if
like
you're crafting the gem or the rune to put in your weapon, Garrett?
Oh no. Oh god.
So crafting upon crafting.
We'll get to that in one prime example of a game.
I've got one of those examples too, actually. Believe it or not, I'm very excited.
It's like, all right, we're gonna craft the gem there. We're gonna put the sword in, and oh my gosh, it's gonna be. Anyways, but yeah, poor crafting system is it's hard or confusing to get the materials, samey items, and I see this a lot more in actually like lower tier RPGs. I would say B tier and C tier, where it really feels like, oh, you just put it in there, and you just left it, and you just checked a box, and it's just like, okay, for the people who are into crafting, here's your checkbox. Here you go. You're able to. We
can put it on the back of the box now.
We have a crafting system, and boom, that's it. Yeah. So yeah, I think Ryan, you more or less agree with that, right?
Yeah. I think that you and I have similar points, and some of the stuff that I even talked about before, like the idea of it being feeling forced in some ways, where you feel forced into it, even if you don't want to go into the crafting system or devote too many resources into it. Also, again, just having rewards with very little impact just really just drives me away from that. And the grindiness I talked about before, we're having to grind it for agreements. But again, that's more of an MMO thing. As someone who's been playing MMOs forever, it's impossible not for me to think about that, because that's just like so intrinsically tied to how I feel about crafting in games in a lot of ways, is playing MMOs over the years and seeing the really bad MMOs and the really good MMOs when it comes to crafting.
Yeah, so. I think, I think RPGs now have gotten better of collecting materials in general, where I feel like back in like early mid 2000s, I had to press X and then press X again and then X again in order. Oh, that's the item I need. All right, let me press X. Yeah. Well, whereas now it's like you kind of like put your cursor over and it's like, okay, here are the materials. Boom, boom. All right, just press one button, take it all, and then go on your way. I think accessibility also comes with convenience of grabbing the materials itself. What are you going to do? Are you going to do a mini game in order to get the material? Are you going to just kill a monster and boom, there you go. You get items automatically. I think as you go on with the game, it should be easier to get materials. So you easy get to the lower tier materials. You can make sure that materials can break down or build up in order to like get a certain crafting item. There could be a blueprint if there is a confusing item or something. So that's the thing with our with crafting system. They can be very unique and deep as complex as you want, and that's what I find the most interest with this mechanic is that it's not. I mean, like skills can be complex too, gameplay can be complex too, but there's like kind of a limit. Crafting, you can make it however you want.
You could do
no
anything.
joke. You can literally do anything with crafting. So, but anyways,
Yeah,
thanks
for sure. So
for going on with my tangent there.
It was a good tangent. I'm not going to lie, Garrett. So we should probably talk about some examples because I feel like now that we've, established what we like and what we don't like about crafting systems, we should talk about, examples of games that do it really well and kind of praise some of those games. So I'll start off since you went off on your little tangent, Garrett, and give you time to rest your voice.
Go ahead.
Because Garrett, believe it or not, we're at another show on this show where I get to talk about Final Fantasy 14 again, Garrett. Hallelujah. The day has finally returned when I can talk about Final Fantasy 14 again. So Final Fantasy 14, I think, actually has one of the best crafting systems in any game I've ever played. First of all, the way that Final Fantasy 14 works, as I've talked about on many shows, is that your main character allows you to assume a bunch of different combat jobs throughout the game, like, Black Mage or White Mage or Dragoon or Paladin and whatnot. But what they did with the crafting that was really interesting in this game, rather than just, picking two professions like a lot of MMOs are, and then, those are your professions forever. This game allows you to get every profession in the game. There's like 12 of them in total. But what they went a step further with the professions in this game. And essentially, each profession has their own storyline associated with them. So, for example, alchemy has its own alchemy guild. And then when you join the alchemy guild, they've got their own story about how they want to, move on to bigger and bigger heights, essentially, but through this like pool of alchemists. And then they have this rivalry with this like other like alchemist, like sect of individuals going on. Like there's all kinds of crazy stuff that happens in the storylines of the crafters in Final Fantasy 14. Not only that, it's not just the story elements that make it great, but also the crafting system itself is actually really simple and easy to use. It gives you items that are really rewarding as well, not just with like armor and weapon upgrades, but also they also reward you with a lot of cosmetic items as well, such as a bunch of different glamour items, or you could also get rewarded with mounts or pets or all kinds of crazy stuff in Final Fantasy 14. Like the crafting system is not only fun to do because of the storylines and how really well written they are, but also it's just fun to interact with the crafting system in that game. I think that it's just a great crafting system overall, and it's definitely one of the standouts for me when it comes to crafting systems. And actually, again, it's like when you talk about, some games where, crafters really fall in love with them, like Final Fantasy 14 is definitely one of those games where you could spend like hundreds of hours just to finish all of the 12, crafting storylines. And then from there, there's a lot of stuff you can craft for the end game content that is just really awesome, that really rewards the players. But at the same time, as each expansion goes on, the items that you craft do have diminishing returns associated with them. So they're not, the best items in the game forever, but they do have a length of time, each expansion, where they're very relevant to the game. But again, there's lots of other stuff you can do with crafting in that game beyond just weapons and armor. It goes just beyond that, and you can do a lot of stuff with it. So Final Fantasy 14 is probably the first one I wanted to bring up as a great game, and a perfect example of crafting done really well in a game. Definitely well thought out by the developers as far as how much effort they put into making the crafting idea work in this game. And again, not a lot of crossover that we were kind of alluded to, where you got to craft the jewel that then you have to craft into the weapon and go on from there, kind of thing.
I think it's very important for an MMORPG to have. I think it's important to have a good crafting system, especially because there's a lot of players that rely on the support or the weapons or the unique items that come from the crafting. And it's just a whole other like just wave of content that you could just make up, systems that you can make up. You say 12 crafting systems?
Yeah.
That's I mean,
It's a
there's
lot.
actually it's a lot. It's a typical level though of MMORPGs. You think of, like rune magic, you can think of cooking, you can think of leather, you can think of armor and blacksmithing. I remember the first crafting system I really dug into, which it's pretty simple. It was RuneScape, the MMORPG. And I really enjoyed leveling up different attributes to make one certain item, like tree cutting or whatever, and then smithing, and then smelting was actually a different thing. Of course, I grinded like crazy because I just didn't know. I didn't have anything else to do when I was a little kid. Just grind away at RuneScape. But I that's kind of like my first taste of MMORPG crafting was like, oh, cool. It's like this, just so many different things you could do, and it all merges one together, and you can make very unique items and very unique support items. So
yeah,
pretty cool.
Yeah, again, I think MMOs are great for that, but I do have some bad examples in MMOs that I'm going to talk about kind of when we get to some of the bad examples. But other than that, the other two I wanted to highlight, one of them, for one thing, is not an RPG, but it's RPG adjacent, where some people argue this series is a RPG series, but others would argue, in fact, that it's not. And in fact, I think we stand with the stance that the series I'm about to talk about, Zelda, is not an RPG series. But at the same time, again, it's close to being an RPG. But I want to talk about it here because I think Breath of the Wild's cooking system is incredible. I think it's really well done. It's really accessible. It really encourages experimentation and offers some really meaningful rewards throughout the whole experience. And again, you're not putting together armor or upgrades for Link or anything like that. Like, it's mostly giving you cooking items that have a bunch of different effects to them, such as the ability to, when you cook spicy food, you can survive in the cold longer and whatnot. Like, there's a bunch of useful items that come from cooking in that game. And it's a system that you feel is important enough, even though it doesn't, spell it out for you through that experience, because it kind of encourages you to discover the cooking system on its own without giving you too many tutorials about it. That feels important enough, but at the same time doesn't feel mandatory all the time. Like it's a game that I think really kind of exemplifies my perfect idea of what the perfect balance of a crafting system really is, where it feels really well thought out, but at the same time is like not super mandatory to getting through that experience, but offering you useful rewards if you decide to engage with it. So that's another one I wanted to highlight. And the other one is definitely from an RPG as well. One that actually we talked about last year, and that is but it comes from a big series in general where cooking has also been a very big part of it as well. And that's the Tales series. The Tales RPGs in particular have all done cooking really well. In particular, though, Tales of Arise did a great job with the cooking system for similar reasons that I just talked about with Breath of the Wild, where I feel like it gives you the perfect balance of, status buffs with your food to make it feel like a really useful system. And not only that, but it makes you feel like you want to do certain side quests in order to get certain cooking ingredients, in order to make certain dishes that then will give you certain very powerful buffs. Like I feel it's all buff driven, but I feel like it's like the perfect example as well of the balance that I'm really looking for, where again, it doesn't feel mandatory. You can totally skip it if you want to and get through the game just fine. But if you engage with it, you're going to find something really rewarding for doing so. So, and not only that, but you also get certain skits and certain dialogue options and things like that come specifically from cooking. So there's even a story reason for why you want to engage with that system more rather than just leave it alone. So I think those are my three examples of what some of my favorite games with crafting systems are. But Garrett, how about you? What are some of your examples of good crafting systems in games?
Yeah, I think you definitely know one of my kind of favorite crafting centered RPG. Was that Chick-fil-A drink? Man, I'm jealous now. I want Chick-fil-A.
I'm sorry.
Crafting centered RPG. It's the Atelier series, as you said before in this episode. And I think I mentioned this before on a previous episode that I feel like that's the novelty of this game itself, other than like the atmosphere and the aura around Atelier. It's very light, very bouncy. very joyful. Definitely different than your Soulsborne games, but the crafting in there is one of the most elaborate systems I've ever seen in a video game. Basically, every time you craft an item or a potion or whatever, it is unique. Mm-hmm. There is like no ifs, ands, or buts. It's like you cannot replicate the same exact thing at the same time unless you're doing the exact same route. So basically how Atelier games, and they've been kind of recycling ideas a lot, but I'll go by the Atelier Ryza series because that's what I'm most familiar with. It's basically like, think of just like a web of like different gems or circles or whatever, and they're all interconnected and whatnot. And you kind of just start out with one material that you add in like the middle or whatever, and you can expand it out however you want. You can go left, right, up, or left, whatever's adjacent. And then at the end, you're going to make your item. You can even make a pickaxe. You can make a sword. You can make a potion. You can make armor. Like it's anything and everything you could think of. It's all about crafting. And so depending on how well you made it from the, like kind of the quality of the materials that you have, it'll have a quality rating on that as well. So you can sell it if you want some money, or if you really want a really powerful like armor or weapon, you want to invest your high quality materials into those type of blueprints or those type of kind of gems or whatever. I think what's really cool about that crafting system as well is the way it advances. Basically, you go from one kind of centered and you go to like the other side and the other gym or whatever at the end, and boom, you have evolved and made a new weapon. And that new weapon has its own little kind of cobweb of interconnecting circles as well. And it's just a bunch of these connecting by the dots. And I think the game does, even though it's complicated, it's a very complex system. The game shows you what you're doing before you actually craft it. It's like, okay, if you want to go down this way, these are the materials you can do. These are the kind of like, and it kind of previews the items. Like, this is the item you're going to make.
Yeah. Are you sure you really want this? If so, press this button.
Exactly. Yes. And so, and even before you even go to that pathway, it's like, hey, if you go to this pathway, you're going to make this bomb. You're going to make this sword. You're going to make this potion. And so, yeah, I think it's pretty accessible system. It tells you, if you don't have a material, it kind of tells you where to go. It's like, hey, if you don't have this material, that's fine. Go to this certain area and just beat some monsters or cut down a tree. I think that's the one fault of the system, is that there's just so many things to knock down, so many things to put down.
But the whole game is designed around it, though. It's different. It's different in an experience like that, where it's like most of the systems in that game are designed around that. Like, and there is combat obviously in that game too, but it's like
there is.
The main focus is the crafting and the gathering versus the combat in those games anyways. Or at least that's just what I think from an outside looking in.
No, you're totally right. They got to the point where you have two different systems in order to like gather materials too. It's the type of weapon you hit, like the tree or the rock. And also it's the actual object itself, whether it's like a piece of grass or a rock or a tree. It can give you a different item. And then depending on if you hit it with a hammer or you hit it with a scythe, or you hit it with, you get different things, and the game actually tells you what to do. It's like, okay, if you need this certain material, you'll need to hit it with this item, and this is what the item looks like, and this is where you get it. So I feel like they do a pretty good job of directing the player, because they know how complex that freaking system is. And I think that's one of the few games that does have that crafting system very well executed.
Well, not only that, but also in a game like that, if they didn't have a lot of those in-game tools available to you, like you'd probably just have a bunch of frustrated players playing it who, especially when you'd get to a point where you probably needed to progress the game and further, I think it would really be kind of a feel bad if they didn't do a lot of this stuff that you're talking about.
Half the game is crafting something, like the main objective is like craft this. And I'm like, oh, wow. And if you're stuck it's just because you haven't gone to the area or you haven't explored enough in that area to find the item. So yeah, it's just a mixed balance of kind of dungeon crawling, coming back to your little hut or whatever, and then kind of just improving your alchemy levels, and then just finding new blueprints of making new items. So there you go. That's one. Yeah. Definitely wanted to mention the Atelier games because they do a pretty good job of implementing that crafting system.
But what else? Did you have any other examples of good crafting systems besides the Atelier games, Garret, or ones that you can think of off the top of your head that are good examples?
So ones I really enjoyed certain aspects of the crafting system. I didn't necessarily enjoy the whole thing, but like there's certain advantages. And I think one of them was Skyrim. Skyrim has a crafting system. It has its faults, but it's pretty good if you know what you're doing. I think basically how crafting works, there's a few things you can do. One is enchanting a weapon or an armor or whatever. But there's also smithing, where you can just make your own weapons and make your own armor. And then there's also like leather making and stuff like that. There could be, I think that's pretty much it with crafting. Yeah,
I think you hit all the major elements. Yeah, cooking is the other one as well.
Yeah, cooking wasn't really that big of a deal with that game. But basically, yeah, it's this intermix between enchanting and smithing. And if I didn't have enchanting in there, I think the crafting system would be far, far lower. I wouldn't enjoy it as much.
Well, I think Skyrim in particular, from what I remember playing of Skyrim and interacting with the crafting system, it kind of falls into the element that I talked about as far as what I don't love about crafting system, which is like the rewards feel like they have little impact outside of the enchanting, especially with the weapons and armor in particular. Like I find that you can find just better stuff just doing the dungeons than you'd ever be able to craft yourself.
Oh, I'm so sorry. The potions too. I completely miss the potions, the apothecary type of stuff.
But you're the apothecary here, Garret. You're not supposed to miss this stuff.
I know. I enjoyed that too, just because you can like bite the whatever material, whatever, and there's 4 different properties for that material, and so you get to learn as you kind of like consume it and kind of have a little side effect. I think that's a little cool interactivity with the alchemy.
Well, it's like a chef trying to taste his own food to, get the idea of like the chemical makeup of the food and how it tastes kind of thing.
What's good about the crafting system is the intermixing between those 3 things: alchemy, the smithing, and the enchanting. Because what you could do is destroy the enchanting in order to learn new enchantments. Whatever it is. It could be burn damage. It could be MP stealing, whatever. And then there's the smithing, whereas like you kind of just like with smithing, it's kind of like any other game where you just make the typical normal weapons and armor. So I there's no uniqueness there. But then the enchanting and then the potions. And then you can kind of like bounce them off each other to give them better benefits, and then better and better and better. Once you max out your smithing, you can get like the best stuff. And that's basically what I did. It's like, let me max out my smithing so I can get the best stuff. And then let me just bounce off of alchemy and enchanting. And you get to the point where you're just getting ridiculous skills and items. And so it kind of rewards you like that if you bounce off of those 3. But if you're just focusing on one, I think it's a little lopsided. It's not as great. I think another great one is Witcher. Witcher does a good job just because it's simple. It's not like too deep. It's like you may need to get a material from a monster, but it's not like too overbearing. And it's kind of I wouldn't say you need it, but it'll help you a lot in the hunting of monsters. And so what I love about Witcher is the preparation prior to hunting. So the crafting did its job. It was very beneficial to me. I was able to get the stuff that I want in order to progress with the game and make it it made it easier for me. I'm sure someone else played the game differently, maybe not interact with that crafting as much, but the crafting is there to help me. And I think that's a good crafting system, something that benefits you if you interact with it. But no harm, no foul. It was a more optional crafting system than anything. So there you go.
For sure. All right. Now it's time to go on the other side of the coin. Let's talk about are examples of bad crafting systems in
There's
games.
many.
Kind of reinforcing some of the stuff we talked about earlier. And I've got to start with one that, man, I've been itching to talk about for a while. And that's Fallout 4.
Fallout 4 sucks.
I think Fallout 4 is a good game. It's a better game that people give it credit for. But man, the crafting system in Fallout 4 is not great. I mean, first of all, a lot of it is mostly like a town building simulator where you're basically, building your own kind of like Fallout village essentially in the game. And there's a crafting system tied to it where you're gathering resources throughout the game and you can craft different items with it, or again, craft different items to put up like, metal panels to like some house that you're going to build in your little village. But normally I wouldn't care so much about it that if I could avoid this system altogether, because I was hoping I get through the entire experience, never having to, go through the crafting system at all in the game. But as you get closer to the end of Fallout 4, there is a requirement to basically build, well, spoilers ahead for Fallout 4, by the way. So just skip ahead a minute if you don't want to,
Okay, you got 7 years. Like, come on now.
Hey, I still feel it's important to at least mention it. So
no, it makes sense.
In Fallout 4, you get halfway through the game and you have to build a giant mech out of construction materials. And you basically have to go to like the ends of the open world to get all these crafting materials. And it feels not only very grindy, but it just grinds the momentum, any momentum that game had, to a complete stop. Essentially, like, because you're forced into this crafting element. And for someone like me who tried the crafting element and put it down because I didn't feel like I was getting out of building my own settlement, combined with the fact that it wasn't a very intuitive system to begin with, but then having this big kind of forced moment in the middle of the game that forces you to do it in order to continue the story just felt like a big feel bad to me. Like at least with the Fallout 4 main campaign. Sure, you could make the argument that Fallout 4 is a better game by not interacting with the main story, just like, many Bethesda, game studios games can be for some people. But man, it really killed that campaign for me in a way that I was not expecting, where it just, because of the crafting system, I felt like any momentum that game had going into its ending just fell off a cliff for me. So it's definitely Fallout 4. That's definitely my prime example of like what not to do with a crafting system. Because again, just the forced nature of it really, combined with the convolutedness of the system, just made it a no-go for me. But then the other one might actually surprise you, because this is actually a game that I spent 10,000 hours plus playing. So I've played this game an awful lot.
Quite a bit.
And that's World of Warcraft, because similarly to what I was talking about with earlier, and it's kind of like the contrast to Final Fantasy 14 in a lot of ways, crafting system, where in World of Warcraft, it's one of those MMOs where, yes, it was developed in the dawn of the MMO age in 2004, when it was first released, and they haven't really like redone a lot of the crafting system by then. Sure, they've made some changes to the way that crafting is leveled, but for the most part, you're basically grinding for the same kind of rewards and whatnot in the crafting system in that game, where I just feel like the rewards to the player are not powerful or impactful enough to the player to go out of their way to then, grind for like 500 hours to get the materials you need in order to make a bunch of really powerful recipes in that game. It feels like the payoff for the crafting in those games in particular, just for World of Warcraft in particular, is not worth it to the amount of work you have to put into it. There's a reason for it sometimes with, if you have a certain profession in that game, a certain crafting profession, at certain times during the game's life cycle, you can take advantage of that by, gold farming, essentially by, accruing a bunch of gold by selling all of your crafted items on the auction house. Mm-hmm. But again, that's just another method of earning gold. And at that point, why not, find another way to reward the players with the gold that they need, rather than tie it to a crafting system that I feel like just doesn't reward the players enough for, the work that they put into it. So
yeah,
especially the weapon ones too, or anything that gives you weapons or items, because if you don't make the weapons and items for certain professions in the very first patch for each expansion, they'll never be useful again. And then at that point, it's just like, it almost feels like, well, why do I have this profession in the first place? Like I might as well, start over and level another one from scratch, essentially at that point. But then you lose that fully leveled profession for the next expansion rolling around, and you've got to level it up again. It's a whole thing. So World of Warcraft
is a whole thing.
Is an example of probably one of the worst examples. And again, it feels to me like it's still, 2004 game design when it comes to crafting systems. And I could excuse it definitely back in the day. And I actually think crafting in a game like World of Warcraft was actually much more important during the, classic Burning Crusade and even Wrath of the Lich King days, like the first 2 expansions and the base game. Mm-hmm. But after that, kind of when Cataclysm rolled around, I felt like that's when crafting in World of Warcraft just kind of took a backseat to everything else. And it just became a fancier way to earn gold in the game and for no other reason to exist, really. So there you go. Those are my 2 examples. I'm sorry I had to, dampen the mood a little bit, but I get a little salty about those 2, especially Fallout 4, because I think I would have enjoyed that game so much more, at least the main story campaign, if it didn't have that crafting system in it. But Garrett, what about you? What are your examples of, not
poor
so good
crafting systems? I'm going to bounce off of you with Fallout 4 as well, because that's definitely on my list. I platinumed that game. I 100%ed the DLC. The stuff you have to do in order to get those trophies, man, oh man. They needed you to craft a lot of different things and settlement building. I think the settlement building was a little too forced. I don't think a lot of people find it interactive enough.
Yeah,
for sure.
I don't think the settlement building was a bad idea, but I just think the way it was implemented was the problem with it.
Yeah, and it didn't look too appealing to me. Okay, I'm gonna make this crappy wall or this crappy stairs or these.
But look at all the other buildings in Fallout, Garrett. What did you expect?
I just it's just so not I don't know, building and doing that wasn't my cup of tea. Still definitely not my cup of tea with Fallout 76.
Yeah, that too.
But keeping those villagers happy is you had to cheat it out in some way. Everything was not really interactive. The electricity and the power source is just it didn't flow very well. Other than that, I did not care for the inventory management I had to do in that game. It's that's a Bethesda game for you, so I'm not gonna.
It's one of the only games out there where you become overburdened due to carrying too many crafting supplies, Garrett.
It's unbelievable how much overburden there is in that game. And then I get so much stuff. I'm I just want this one attachment on my gun, and I don't have it. And I just have all this other things. Do I really need this? Do I don't know. You really don't know in that game until you progress more and more. So yeah, Fallout 4. Oof, that was a rough crafting system. Another one that I don't see the reason why they do this and they keep doing this. Fire Emblem. I don't care about crafting these weapons for my soldiers and my warriors. Fire Emblem 3 Houses, everything else is pretty good. I love the gameplay. I love the story. I love the decisions you had to make. It's abhorrent. The crafting of weapons is too needless, too dumb, it's very tedious because you don't know when you're going to get these materials. Yeah. You never know.
Well, not only that, but all the crafting materials goes back to an example you gave earlier in the show where it's all about you can buy all the weapons in that game anyways. So and you'll always have enough money to do that. So why even bother with it?
Exactly. Yeah. There was just, I don't know, some instances where I felt like I wanted to upgrade. It's upgrading the weapons too, It's just oh man, I'm going to get this new weapon and this new upgrade. It's well, no, I still don't have that material in there. It's when am I going to get it? I don't know. I really don't know. You have to search around, and then you search around in these battles and you get the weapon. You get a better weapon. You get, and these weapons get destroyed. And it's just, I don't like the system as much. What I really prefer and suggest in a Fire Emblem game is make a weapon or whatever progress with you along with your soldier. Make it its own character. And I think a lot of I hope other games follow suit with that as well. I like a deeper, as you could tell, I like a much deeper system than what is already in place with Fire Emblem. They already made other things complex, like the classes and the skills or whatever, and the bonding and the relationships. Why not make a weapon complex as well?
Well, they could almost do like what they did with Bilious Weapon, where like at a certain point during the experience, you get a specific weapon for Byleth that you basically have for the rest of the game, and it kind of evolves with that character. Imagine if they did that for everybody, like all your party members, and then you could upgrade it through an in-game crafting system, and then it would feel like, again, it wouldn't be super forced because you could still probably get through the game without, interacting too much with it. But at the same time, it would probably really reward you for doing so. I think that would be a really interesting hook going forward for a game.
Yeah, for sure. Other than that, I don't have like a straight up like another video game example, but just what I've seen in crafting systems or poor examples of is just like samey weapons or grindy stuff or overlapping between weapons and what can be found in the game. It's just I've seen too many examples of those, so I don't want to list others out.
Oh yeah, for sure. And actually, Garrett, I'm glad you brought up Fire Emblem because I had completely forgot about that game's crafting system, and as soon as you said Fire Emblem, I'm like, oh yeah, the memories came flooding back to me. I was like, yeah, that one's not great either.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Hopefully they improve on that.
So now that we're an hour into the conversation, Garrett, we should probably move to final thoughts on crafting. Sure. Overall, Garrett, now that we've had this conversation and kind of talked about the things we like about crafting and things that we don't like about crafting, is there anything that you'd like to say to developers that you just hope to see in crafting systems going forward? And now that we've talked it out at least a little bit.
I think what we said in this episode is like kind of like huge, like bullet points for us. I think the biggest thing I want to give to, I wouldn't say just developers, just people in general to look for is balance. Is like, I want the balance between actually getting and investing into it and getting the same reward out of a crafting system. I think it's all about balance. And then, well, however deep or complex you want to make it to go, that's fine. Make it very clear, like in the Atelier games, it's all about crafting. Getting into it, it is about crafting. But I think you can definitely have a good optional crafting system in there as well, and it could reward the player, or if they do something else, that is fine as well. And so yeah, I wanted to go through this mechanic because I think it's one of the more complex mechanics that you can definitely find in a game, because it could be as simple or as deep as you want it to be. It could be kind of any item you want it to be. So yeah, that's my final thoughts. What about you, Ryan?
Yeah, my final thoughts ultimately coming away from this conversation are similar to yours, where I really just hope that, now that we start seeing more and more games take advantage of crafting systems, and you're right, they're not like super ubiquitous at that point, but we're seeing more and more games ticking that checkbox on the back of their box to making sure that their game has a crafting system of some kind. I just hope that we see just more effort and more importance put on crafting systems going forward, and the idea of them getting more love during the development phase and feeling like they're a bigger part of the experience than just, a feature on the back of the box is what I'll say. Because again, like I think that the best systems that we talked about they had things in common, such as the importance to the story in the world, or being rewarding to the players, things like that I think are really important to have in crafting systems going forward. And I hope we just see more of that, like more, but also at the same time, I also hope we see more exploring of the space, because I definitely think there's a lot of area to explore as far as crafting goes. Because again, like we've seen some detailed systems, but we've also seen some crazy ideas with crafting going forward.
I do want to mention like other crafting centric RPGs that I didn't mention, and I'm sorry, but there's a lot of them, like Stardew Valley. Then there's Dragon Quest Builders is a good one. I love the crafting system in that game. There's Fantasy Life. There's Rune Factory. There's like all these it's kind of getting more into the farming life sim,
like anything like Harvest Moon, stuff like that. Yeah, they're all about that. Yeah.
So anyways, nice. I just wanted to shout them out. There's some good games out there.
All good. Well, before we go, Garrett, it's time to party up because we're recruiting new players to the party, and Jose Jimenez over on the Discord has decided to join up. And he asked the question, I'm not sure if this question had ever been posted, but I'm curious. What is an RPG mechanic that you two would like to see evolve or be adapted in video games? So as far as different mechanics, crafting is definitely one of them. But since we had this whole conversation about crafting, Garrett, is there another mechanic I think that you'd like to see from an RPG maybe evolved or be adapted into more games? For me, I'm going to start it off because I had a little bit more time to think about this one. And that is the confidant system in Persona, in the Persona series. I would love to see a system like that be in more games. Where you basically build up relationships with other people that your character is working with throughout the experience. And then you not only get like little side stories from them, but also certain benefits that make it worth your while going through that, but also not being like a forced part of the experience as well. Because we have some like almost like dating sim like elements to certain games that try and go in that direction, but focus more on the dating side of things rather than, just, almost like bromance kind of relationships or like friend type of relationships that you kind of see in Persona. And I would love to see more games kind of take advantage of that RPG mechanic, where even though that's like hyper specific to one game series, it's a mechanic that I feel like would work well in a lot of RPGs. And it's something I would love to see more of, or just maybe exploring of that space, or even like, just like, I'm really excited to see what they do with Persona 6 and how they maybe evolve that mechanic as well. Because I mean, as we talked about in the Discord today, Garrett, Persona 5 came out like almost 6 years ago. So we know Persona 6 is probably around the corner. So I'm really excited to see what they do with that in that game. And then another one that I thought of actually is another one that's like hyper specific to one game series or a game, I guess now a game company. And the only problem with this is that unfortunately it's a trademarked game mechanic, so it can no longer be used in other games outside of this game company's games. And that is the Nemesis system from Middle-earth Shadow of War or Shadow of Mordor, where essentially you have like a hierarchy system of enemies in the game. And as you kill one, another enemy takes its place, or you'll have certain enemies in the hierarchy who come after you for revenge and things like that. And the way that it interacts with the player, I think is actually a really interesting and unique system that I thought like would have been copied a million times over again after Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor came out in a bajillion RPGs. But unfortunately, we never saw that because of the fact that that the company actually copyrighted that system. So they can't actually, do anything similar in other games. But that's a system also that I think would work really well in RPGs, especially action RPGs. Like if The Witcher 4, for example, had a system like that. Oh yeah, I think it would be awesome. So
that would be amazing.
Yeah. So that's another one that I wish would be more applicable to other RPGs. I know, again, I'm being super specific like this, but I think those are two systems that could really not only benefit from an evolving of their mechanics, but also just work great in a lot of other franchises. So that's what I think. Garrett, what do you think?
Those are really good ones. I was thinking of the enemy system. Now I know they copyrighted the system. The legalities behind it. I don't know how specific or how broad they really could do it though.
Right.
So
it's enough that no one else has tried it ever since. Because they're also because they're doing it for that Wonder Woman game that's coming out. But like that's the only other game I know of that has the Nemesis system.
There's some, I wouldn't say it's the Nemesis system, but there's a little bit of hints of that in Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It was they
had the Order of the Ancients in that.
Yes. Game. Yeah. I think, for the enemy system, I think it's a very unique idea, but it has to be fitting for the game. Because it is a unique type of thing. And I agree with you. A Witcher 4 with some type of Nemesis system would be great. But I also think that Witcher is about the monsters themselves and where they are inhabiting and come from. So it may, so it just got to fit too. So, but anyways, what kind of RPG mechanic? I think we have got to the point with skills and levels to a grinding halt. And I think this really happened in action RPGs and action adventure games, really, I would say, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago. I feel like there's games 20 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago, that I'm getting kind of the same thing. I'm getting the same progression. I'm leveling up. I am, okay, cool. I got a new skill. All right, let me get that skill and move on forward. I wish there was a little bit more, I don't know, like a little malleability behind it. You're investing in one skill or investing in one thing, and you're going off and doing that. And I see that a little bit in games like Assassin's Creed, where you invest in, like, let's say sneaking or more like that, or you want to go more fighting. Okay, you can go there. I think games are getting better, and I think Final Fantasy really, especially like 10 and 12, and like making these very complex skill systems helped with that. I just want the developers kind of just not reinvent, but kind of just go back to the drawing board of what a skill system actually is. And what can you do differently other than, oh, I have some skill points, let me spend it on this and let me spend it on that. And I think it could be a little bit more organic than that. I'm not sure what it is yet. So don't.
Well, and with skill points, it's interesting too that I'm glad you brought up Final Fantasy, Garrett, because I've been playing a certain little game in my off time, the cinematic masterpiece that is Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. Goodness. And the skill system in that game is like the complete opposite of what you'd find in a normal Final Fantasy game, where it's really complex because there's a bunch of different points that you put in, but none of it feels satisfying. And I'm just like, I'm putting points into all these skills and like, I'm assigning them to Jack's abilities, but I'm like, none of these feel like they're more powerful or there's any reason to do them other than the fact that they look flashy, I guess. But that's a game in particular that I don't feel like really, utilizes the skill system really well, as opposed to a game that I know a lot of people don't like, but is a game that I think actually does skill systems really well, which is Final Fantasy 13. I think that it does like it gives you a really good progression for your skills in that game, but also gives you a lot of choices with where you're going to put skills in that game. And I think that's actually a really good example of, where to put skills. So again, two examples of the same franchise going in completely different directions with skills management. But I think we should kind of save the skills conversation as well, Garrett, because
for sure,
that might be wink, might be another episode we might do down the line anyways. So I kind of want to save our conversation about that for another day. Plus the show's kind of long enough. So before we go, Garrett plugs go.
You can follow me at Twitter at Blind Explosion. You can also find me on the Nintendo Shack, part of the Play Some Video Game Podcast Network. We are live every Thursday nights, 6:30. Wait, hold on. It's 6:30 Pacific and then 9:30 Eastern Standard Time over at twitch.tv/PSVG. And it's also available on podcast services around the globe. And that's pretty much it.
Very nice for my friend. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. You can find us on Twitter at Yumi Capri's, on YouTube at youtube.com/Yumi Capri, and on podcast services around the globe. Also, don't forget Yumi Capri Day, April 15th, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, youtube.com/Yumi Capri as well. Come hang out with us. We're going to be there. We're going to be talking about all kinds of stuff. So come hang out with us that day. So for Garrett Bland, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been the 41st level of the RPG Cave. We're only 9 more levels before level 50. And
dang. Bye-bye.
The RPG Caves Mana is powered by patrons over at patreon.com/Yumi Capri. And from the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you to our over 70 patrons, starting with our Capremium producers, Dallas Ford, Jonathan Brown, the man behind the music on the Xbox Drive and the Nintendo Drive. You can check out his new album, In My Element, over on Apple Music, as well as his website, and Lee Navarro, the fearless leader of the Phoenix Overdrive Extra Life team. Our platinum producers are Robbie Bobby Miller and Trucker Sloth, and our gold members, Argo, Brandon Myers, Dallas Robbins, Dano, Emily O'Kelly, Foolish Fuji, Joel Brooks, Jose Jimenez, Mac Time, Marcus O'Neill, Mr. and Mrs. Nasty Boots, RJ Kern, Skinny Matt, Tony Baker, and Xavier Reyes. Thank you all for all of your support, and if you're interested in joining the Patreon, head over to patreon.com/Yumi Capri and pick the tier that's right for you.